Hello and welcome to the Ireland on the Fly podcast about the people and places of fly fishing in Ireland. Earlier in the year I caught up with the casting instructor and guide Robert Gillespie to find out more about his life and career in fly fishing. Since then he has changed his career path as a chef, but he is still a mine of information when it comes to improving your casting and salmon angling. And for this follow-up interview I wanted to glean some nuggets from Robert around tactics and technique. Robert places great emphasis on knowing the type of water you're fishing, the light conditions, and timing the salmon runs. And listening to him speak, you can't help but come away with tips and advice that will definitely improve your fishing. I first asked him though about his change of career.
The route to being a full-time guide, there's less estates in Ireland than you would have in Scotland, say, so there's only a certain amount of options available to people who would want a full-time job. And then, there is no real, there might be one or two full-time jobs, but you'd have to fill in the winter, usually doing something else as well, there has been a decline in the fishing, all right. There's no question about that. In certain areas, as I talked the last time, like I said, the autumn runs here aren't what they were and stuff like that. It's hard to say. I'm not answering this question correctly. I would say that there's been a decline in my lifetime overall, but there's still a demand for people to come to Ireland to fish. There's still people interested in salmon angling. There's still new developments in the sport, and there's a lot of good trout fishing in the country as well, and that seems to be looked after, and people seem to protect the natural trout fisheries and all that. On the Great Lakes, for instance, there seems to be an interest. I would be more involved in the salmon angling side of it, so I'd say you have to adjust to the natural changes in the runs, as I was talking about the last time. Like, for instance, I've no interest. My father used to say, actually, even years ago, if you haven't your salmon gathered up by the middle of July, you have no real business looking for them afterwards. You may or may not get good fishing afterwards, but you should be out spring fishing and early grilse fishing. That's when that's when the fish are at their prime, and that's when they're worth fishing for, and that's when they're a good quarry. Now, if there was good autumn fishing at times, he said this after the autumn fishing had started to decline, and you're kind of right, as I said the last time, there's a difference between fishing for autumn fish and fishing for salmon in the autumn. I have no personal interest myself now, absolutely none, in fishing for old, long, stale resident fish. It just doesn't interest me, and I wouldn't advise anyone to do it either. Now, I target the prime fish when they're fresh run, and that's when the fishing's best anyway, and that's when they're most likely to take and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I think as well as, isn't it that if anything, green shoots from this year is that you hear of the kind of rise of interest in terms of people wanting to get back out to outdoors and nature and rediscovering fishing. And I know I've read it in America and the UK in terms of kind of licenses, sales gone up. So fingers crossed though. And I know, just speaking to a couple of people anecdotally, they're saying friends of theirs have gotten back into it now as well. So you'd hope maybe.
Whenever drift netting stopped, right, everybody thought immediately that this country would become like, say, Iceland or parts of Canada or something, that there would be a deluge of salmon coming into the rivers and they'd be thriving once again. Everything would be back to what it was, say, years ago, before drift netting or whatever, and thought that this would be the new norm, and that would support a very big tourist industry, and industry would benefit, in areas like Connemara or whatever. But the funny thing is, like, about the second year, about 2008, I think it was, after drift netting stopped, there was a bumper run, and then I thought for certain, and I thought this is going to be the way it's going to be all the time, but it didn't happen, and that's what I was going to say at the start. But it's maybe too pessimistic. We think, well, why didn't that happen then? And is it that the natural nature does decide? I've always said that anyway. But is it that the natural environment was under so much pressure that it can't recover, or is it because of cycle change or whatever? But it's a disappointment, let's put it that way, that it didn't get back to the numbers that it would be pre-drift netting days. Now, having said that, when I worked at Delphi there, and they have a ranching program, and they bring fish back, that's very successful. Most of the fish, maybe 80% of the fish caught there, are ranched fish. And you can't really tell the difference between a ranched spring salmon, say, and a wild one, except that the adipose fin has been clipped. You wouldn't really, there is more or less the same fish. You couldn't tell otherwise. And, that's a successful program, which then makes you think, well, okay, nature must still be all right in that, there's spring fish coming back when you put them in. So it must, there must be something on it. Say, and you'll then there's other times you look at fish that come back, and you wouldn't see better conditioned fish than spring salmon anywhere. Very deep, very heavy fish, chunky shoulders. Now you think, well, they didn't suffer any problems out at sea. So it makes you wonder. All these things make you wonder. Having said, as I say, it's very. I don't want to be pessimistic, but somebody looking to get into the salmon angling industry, well, there's international travel nowadays as well, so people can go abroad and stuff. I don't know what way to look at it. That's all. I'm just glad. One of the benefits of being older is I've seen good fishing in the past, especially good autumn fishing before it disappeared. So that's the only one of the benefits I can say. But I wouldn't put anybody off either. It's a lifestyle choice. Sometimes it's more of a lifestyle choice than anything else. And if you want to do that and want to be in that world, well, go for it is what I would say as well.
And just even from talking about salmon angling from an angler's perspective, I kind of now nearly see it as, it might be harder in terms of catching the fish, but that's the challenge in itself. It's trying to find out more and make yourself a better angler to catch the fish. And that's the kind of way I think I need to start looking at it, in terms of, we have to accept salmon runs, whether they're cyclical or it's, something bigger that's going on in the planet, that the numbers have declined, but there's still people catching fish. So you just got to be a better fisherman to do it. So just on that, Robert, I wanted to ask you really kind of, because I've read some of the fascinating pieces you've got on your website in terms of and they're very, very detailed and very learned in terms of kind of salmon tactics. We might just touch on that in terms of kind of how people can improve their catch rates or their salmon angling, especially when they're approaching a river. But you want to approach it maybe from a certain different perspective and look at it as in the terms of the different anglers that exist.
Yeah, it depends what the person wants out of it themselves, or it depends on the person's mindset. At the beginning, there's a learning curve in anything, but some people are happy to go salmon fishing because they're working all the time, and they get away at the weekend for a day, and then maybe meet their friends and they go somewhere and have a nice lunch in a pub or whatever, and they're just doing it to dabble in it, and if you get a fish, a fish might pass by, they might hit good conditions, they might get a fish, and they might not, and sometimes they will have a great time and they'll remember that, and it's all ideal, but they're not going to take it any more serious than that. They're dabbling, and there's other people then. Maybe they're living beside a river and they're in a club, an association water, and they can start to get to know that river really well and start to learn, where the salmon stay at different times of year and why, and what flies or tactics are good on that river, what lines and stuff. Then there's other people that are totally, how would I say it? Hunter type people who want to know the reason behind everything. They might have started off as in one of the other categories, but then they get into realizing that they can see sometimes there is a reason for things to happen, and things do have a pattern, and the fish do take in this place or that place, or stop here at this time of year and not at other times. You start to put the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle together, and the more they learn, then the more they want to learn, and the more interesting it becomes. And I often define it this way: there's a difference between catching fish by design and catching fish because you're out there fishing and a fish sees your fly and takes it. That's fresh fish that's passing. And really the answer to that would be if you can predict what's going to happen and why, and give the reason why. Now, I don't mean the reason why totally. I mean, what happens and roughly why it happens. You don't know why salmon taking all the mystery. No, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about because you were using this angle, this speed, and this speed at this time, and in this lie. It's enough to know what happens. You don't have to know every why, but roughly why, as far as the practical approach is concerned. Now, I would say that a lot of the stuff that I would have to say only really applies to the people that are hunter type people, that are keen on, because that's what I became myself, and what I learned from other people that I met as well, who told me things such as, for instance, one of the greatest revelations I ever got was when I went to the Upper Blackwater one time, and there was a lot of grilse there, really a lot, and they were jumping. And myself and my father was setting up the rod, and there was a man called Kieran Bolster. There was his stretch, and I said to him, "There's a lot of fresh grilled there." He says, "Yeah." I said, "Should have it's good fast fly water, and it should prospects should be good." He said, "Oh, you won't catch anything on the fly today." And I said, "Well, the water's clean, everything looks good." I said, "It's a reasonable height, this fish there." I said, "What are you seem pretty certain about that?" He said, "You won't catch them." And I said, "Well, we'll see." He says, "Yeah, we'll see." He said, "I'm telling you, you won't catch them." And he said, but he said, "This is a big enough river." He said, "And you're looking at the river. You come from the Moy." I said, "Yeah, it's a lock-fed river." Yeah, he says, "In low water, clear water, the salmon on a lock-fed river, or indeed on a spring-fed river like the Slaney, they'll still take the fly." He said, "But this is a spate river. It doesn't matter about the size of it." He said, "It's by nature, it's a spate river, and it needs recent rain and a drop in flood for the fish to take well." He said, "And you're going fishing the spate river in low water." He said, "You might get one late in the evening on a small trout fly or mini tube just before dark or something like that. But he said during the day you won't get good fishing because there's no spate. Now, if it was a drop in spate, not many fish there and all that, you catch them." And I foolishly, because I was younger, said to him, "I'll show you. I'll catch them anyway." Anyway, because in my mind, if that was on the Moy, for instance, or on the Shannon at Castle Connell, and there was that many fresh grills there, I would have expected, to be able to catch them and have a good day. But and then he said, I always remember him saying before he left, and because this was their first day there, and he said, "By the way," he said, "do you light line wormfish?" And I said, "I do, yeah." And "You know the proper light line?" I said, "I do, yeah." He said, "Well, if you want to get a fish," he said, "you could do that." He said, "You'd fill a sack of them if you do that before you leave." He said, "If you're stuck," and he said, "You probably will be stuck." And he was right, you see. He was absolutely right. But that was the first time someone told me about the nature of rivers, and then it all made sense. So the Moy being a lock-fed river, people in the Moy times make the mistake of thinking, it'll fish better after flood. Sometimes you're getting good fly fishing, and a flood will actually ruin it because it's settled and the water's coming out of Lough Conn and Cullen, and the fish are there. All you need on the Moy is actually the right type of weather, dull, a bit windy, stuff like that. And that's why you have things on the Moy, for instance, like mini tube fishing that work really, really well, which don't work as well in other places. They might, as I said, the hour before dusk or something like that, but it doesn't offer the same experience that you get on the Moy. And it's just down to the nature of the river. So you've lock fed rivers, spring fed rivers, and spate rivers, and it doesn't matter about the size. But in essence, the Moy and spring fed rivers like the Slaney are different from true spate rivers. So that's one of the first things and that was one of the biggest things that I realized. So, like, if I'm going to fish a spate river, I'm not going to go to it when it's low. And I'm not saying you wouldn't catch an odd fish, but you won't experience generally good fishing. So it's better to hit it when it's right, stuff like that.
But that's like what you've explained to me just makes it so clear, Robert, in terms of the explanation. One thing strikes me as you're talking me through that is, do you think, like, when you read any of the kind of information around salmon fishing, that it's too much focused on the gear, the equipment, and the flies, as opposed to the actual type of rivers, as you've just explained it? Like, at least with trout fishing, there's the focus on entomology and why fish are catching at the time.
Yeah,
Do you think there needs to
yeah,
be more of a focus then, from a salmon angler's perspective, on the actual river, like you've just explained it, the type of river? Because you said because as you've explained it there, there's a whole rationale when and
there
why
is. Yeah.
salmon will catch, and like there's not a huge, like, from my read, maybe it's limited, but the limited reading I've done is that there's not as much of a focus on that type of focus on conditions.
There isn't a focus, and you learn these things from basically the older people, the older generation. Another good example was, although it does apply to rivers, but it was when I was lock fishing on Loch Belter, and there was a gilly there, James O'Hora. They used to call him the Seagull Man. I think he's dead a while now. But he told me one day about the leaden light. Now, that was a revelation as well to me about uh, certain situations, certain conditions. So we're out on Belter in the springtime fishing for spring salmon. In the 80s, used to do that. On the sort of last week of March, the first 10 days that it opened, and we used to go bring a party over and all that stuff. But anyway, I used to let him fish because, you'd learn by watching him the way he fished and stuff like that. And anyway, one day it looked good to me. It was dull, windy, and everything was all right. And I realized by this stage that anything that man said was, gospel, basically. He'd got the experience behind it. And I says to him, because he liked the fish, I said, here, you want to fish for a while, James? I'll take a break. He says, no, not really. And that was the first time he'd refused. And I said, you don't want to fish? He says, no. I says, well, are you feeling all right? No, he says, you won't catch a fish today. Now, this is like at about 11, quarter past 11 in the morning. I said, you won't catch a fish? I said, it's still and windy. I said, looks all right. He said, oh, it doesn't look all right. He said, doesn't. And then he said, watch your flies when they're coming in. He said, see if you can see them clearly in the water. And I couldn't, there's a glare. He says, there's a glare off the water. I said, yeah. He said, that's the lead and light. He said, look at the horizon. He said, the lake and the sky and clouds and mist. He said, you can't really different. He said, the lake, this is what he said. He said, the lake looks like mercury or molten lead. And I says, right. And so it did, and then he said, there's a haze in the air. It's a faint haze, but it's there. He says, a high pressure dullness and all this stuff. And he explained it. And he said, just look at that light. He said, whenever you see that light, and how you know it is, you can't see your flies coming in the water clearly, you won't catch any salmon. That's it. He said, that's the way it is. And now we paid him every day, and this was in the morning. And I remember it was a Welsh visitor at the front of the boat. And I says, okay, we'll go in. I said, we can go touring today or do something else. And no, this guy's looking at me. I said, listen, if he says we're not going to catch any salmon, we're not going to catch any salmon. That's the end of it. I said, I know enough to know that he knows what he's talking about. So I said, I'm not going to flog a dead horse. I said, use the day to go and send a postcard home or go shopping or whatever it is you have to do. So we went in, and we're in about 11:30. So that was fine. I paid him the full wages, obviously, on tip and everything as I normally do. I always do that and let him off, you see. And I said, thanks for telling me. So he said, okay. And then about 3 nights later, we're out and we're about to go in. We hadn't got a fish. And he turned around and he says, no, don't go in yet. He said, when that wind dies off and you get a glassy ripple, he said, that cold wind dies. He said, the fish will take for about half an hour, an hour. And he stayed out. The only reason he stayed out is we were decent with him, and then he stayed out, and then we caught 2 fish. So he knew what was happening in that lake just to look at the light and all the rest. But one time then later, I remember being taken to Delphi, and down the road, the guy was excited, nearly jumping in the seat because it was dull and windy. But I could see then the lead and light, So arrived there, and I just knew that it was all shot because James had told me it wouldn't matter, river, lake, anything, it doesn't work. So they were actually excited because of the conditions, and I said, no, it's the worst conditions imaginable. So what do you mean? I said, the lead and lights in it. What do you mean the lead and light? I said, look at the haze and look at the. I said, when you go down the river, I said, you won't be able to see your flies correctly when they're coming in. There's the glare in the water and all that, which was the case. And once you see it and recognize it once, then you recognize it all the time. And the thing about it is, it looks good if you don't know, because it's dull. There's a bit of wind. Everything looks like what you'd expect to not glaringly bright or anything like that. But there's this glare and this awful. It's actually the worst conditions I know of. And the sad thing about it is, it looks okay if you don't know, but once you know, you know. And I said to that day, that was, nobody will catch any fish today. That's it. It's all over. It's a waste of time. And that's exactly what happened. Yeah. Now, both those things that I've mentioned there, you learn from older people. Now, when you talk to older people, it's like years ago when we were on the road, for instance, and they would tell you about the color, for instance, the colors of dying shrimp flies, like the claret, the wine claret, and stuff like that. So throughout your life, if you ever meet these people, it's like another guy told me one day. I remember spinning down in Ballina on the canal stretch when there was a big autumn run, and that guy died tragically. Slim Colley, call him. He fell off his bike and push bike, and unfortunately, I think he broke his neck and died in hospital. But he was a great angler, and he was out every day, all the time. And we were fishing, and I was young. I might have been about like 16 or 17. And it was one time it was open in October. I know that much because that's when it was. And he said to me, listen, he said, I remember I hadn't got a fish. There was a good few fish been caught. And he said to me, come here. He says, cast out there. And he says, see that smooth bit out there? Yeah. He says, just throw your, it was a waverback sticky spinner. Remember it, like the first cast coming across, bang, the fish took it. And then he just said to me, don't fish any rough bit. He said, only fish the smooth bits. He said, see that smooth flow? And he explained to me about the flow. Now, later on, it was explained to me by a scientist that it was called a viscous flow. And he said when the water gets high and especially when it gets high and gets mad, he said, look for the smooth bits and just fish the smooth bits. And now, after he told me that, my catch rate increased dramatically. I was young at the time, but it made such a difference because he said they're the only lies the fish will stay in the heavy water. And if you end up you're only fishing lies where fish are running, fresh fish are staying, well, your chances then, you could turn around and say maybe 85% of the river could be a waste of space in the flood. And then the more extreme conditions are, the more focused the fish are, or concentrated the fish are in the areas that are right. And if you're only fishing them areas, then your catch goes up because you're fishing more efficiently, let's put it that way. Whereas when before I was just fishing everywhere. And so largely a lot of the time I was just wasting my time. But the reason I was wasting my time is because I didn't know. And this is the key to everything. When you don't know something, then you might meet someone to put you on the right track. But the other thing is, if you look at, you could work that out eventually yourself if you were careful enough to analyze whenever everybody's there fishing and see where people are catching fish at what water heights. If you were clever to make a note of everything that's going on around you, you'd probably work it out eventually yourself. Now, it's easier when someone tells you, and then and after you say, as I was about to say now before, once you know it, you know it, and then you can see it happening in real life. And it's just like, say, it's the same with flies. We're talking about flies. And what flies are successful? Now, fly tyers suffer. I'm a fly tyer. It suffers. Some fly tyers, I don't suffer from an affliction where they keep trying to make new flies and new flies. Now, I never try to make a new fly ever. It's like a big experiment going on all around you all the time. Like, why is a cascade a successful fly? It's not successful because, there's thousands of flies made. It's successful because there's a big experiment going on where people use them, and a successful fly will be passed along or recommended by someone and eventually becomes widely used. But it became widely used because it works. That's why it's successful. It's not successful because someone said, oh, I like the look of that, or I like this, or I'll try this or try that. It's successful because it works, as all flies are successful because they work. And the cascade works well, say, in fast fly water, whereas on the Moy, then in other places where it's slower, the fly you need to choose is a fly that suits the slower water, like Irish shrimp flies or mini tubes and stuff like that. So that's another whole reason that we're talking about. There's always reasons for things, and when you put all the reasons together, a bit at a time, it's like building a jigsaw puzzle. And how do you know you got it right? You can predict in advance what's going to happen. That's confirmation. Then, as it's confirmed in real life, you know that you're on the right track. What's happening, and the best way to learn is to realize there's a reason for everything. And once you realize that, you start to put the pieces together.
Can I ask you, just in terms of flies and in tactics, what are you looking for? Like, again, it goes according to the conditions. Are you looking at depth first off when you get to the river and you're looking at the lies, and then you're going to fly choice after that, is it?
Yeah, so mostly the water speed and the time of year and the type of river, if it was a peat stain river or gin clear water. So the speed of the water would be the biggest single factor, let's say, and then the freshness of the fish because of the time of the year. Let's say like the willy gun is a very successful salmon fly, willy gun tubes. Now you won't really go wrong. There's some flies that are universal flies. Let's put it that way. I've caught early spring fish on the willy gun and gin clear water. I've caught lots of groats in the willy gun and peaty water on the Arif in July and stuff like that. So it's a generally universally successful fly. It suits clear water, it suits peaty water, it suits large sizes and small sizes. I usually use it in tubes. So that's a really useful fly to have, and that's why it's popular and that's why it's successful. The Cascade, you could say, is similar. So there are other flies then that are not so universally successful, but they're extremely successful in their circumstances, in the right situation. That's like why the Moy River is fairly unique, and that's why on the Moy, for instance, Irish shrimps will generally up the river anyway will outfish almost everything else because their design suits the water and the way you're fishing, the way the fish suits the water. Now, what when you look at when you look at the water speed, you're going to decide. I've said this in the past. Is either you're going to fish passively or you're going to fish actively, and that depends on the water speed. So passive fishing means the water's going to fish the fly for you. In other words, in fast water, if you cast across 45 degrees, whatever, and hold the rod, and the current's bringing the line around to your own bank, well, the water going past that fly gives the fly a fly water speed itself. So now you might have to speed it up or slow it down by maintenance or whatever its progress, but fly water speed is the key thing. In other words, to get technical about it, when there's water moving from the front of the fly to the back of the fly, that's fine. Now, if I went to the reason you have to have a fly water speed is it's got to look alive to the fish. If it was just dead drifting down with the current, it's going to look like a leaf or anything. It doesn't create the impression of life, and the fish are only going to notice something by the movement or by the impression of life that's creating. So if it looks like an item of prey to them, it's just the instinct to have. Sometimes they'll attack it just from predatory instinct, but it's got to have a fly water speed. Now, the fly water speed, if I was fishing, let's say, passively on the Galway weir pool, and I'm throwing out, a posh tosh tube or some type of willy gun or whatever, letting it cross, and the current's faster and everything's fine. I'm fishing down and across standard way. That's the passive type of fishing. Now, if it was on the pier side or the walkway side, and I put on an Irish shrimp, and I wanted to fish Irish shrimp at a specific lie, right? I wouldn't throw it across and let the current swing it around, because the fly isn't designed for that. The fly is designed for me to pulsate the fly across the river to me now. So what I would do is I would pick a spot where I think the fish is going to be, even in the fast water, and I would throw up and across, and it would be not right across the river. It would just be for the patch that I want to fish, and then I would hand line and pulsate and lift the rod and fish that fly back towards me. So it would be crossing the river, but it would be moving more downriver as it crosses than if I was fishing passively, say I had cast downriver. So it's like, let's put it this, here's a good example. If it was a rectangle or a square box, so let's say your rectangle and you've your top left corner, bottom right corner. So if you're fishing passively, that rectangle is going to be the opposite way to the one that you're fishing actively. The long side, if you're fishing actively, would be parallel with the riverbank, and the long side, if you're fishing passively, would be the short side would be parallel to the riverbank, if you get what I mean. So the fly would be starting the top left, finishing the bottom right. So how you fish that triangle, how you move that fly through that rectangle, not triangle, rectangle, is how you're fishing. And if I have to hand line and lift the rod and pulsate the fly back with an Irish shrimp fly, then I'm fishing actively. I'm doing something. Now, the other way, when I'm fishing passively, the water's doing the main thing. And it doesn't mean I do nothing. I have to have the cast put in the right angle, the right place in the first place. Then I have to manage the line by either holding the rod out or mending it, maybe holding it in and mending it because I want to speed it up a bit, or I could slow it down or whatever. But or raising or lowering the rod or mending the line, whatever. But I'm always actively fishing the fly, even when I'm passively fishing, if that doesn't make sense. But what I'm saying, I'm not just throwing it out and ignoring it. I'm making sure it's doing what I want it to do, where I want it to do, how I want it to do it. Now, sometimes that means a lot of work from me, and sometimes not a lot. And for instance, a good example would be at Delphi on the bridge pool. If I'm fishing in the springtime for early spring fish and fishing a single-handed rod, and I'm fishing a sunray shadow, not a really big giant sunray shadow, just a normal, like 9 centimeter, 7 centimeter sunray shadow. And I'm kneeling on the bank because I don't want the fish to see me. And I'm crouching down, and I'm single-handed rod, say 10, 11-foot rod. I'm working upstream. I'm casting upstream at 45 degrees. The water's deeper on my side. And what I'm doing is casting up. And as soon as the fly hits the water, it's called you hit the ground running. So that fly hits the water, and I don't let it sink, pause, hesitate, or nothing. I immediately hand line back and doing long just by hand line, and I'm steadily lifting the rod as well. So the fly isn't stopping and starting. It's continually moving, and it's making a furrow, and it's coming down river and down across towards me. And that's probably the most exciting fishing of all. You just eyes on that pool, the springfish are. And when that springfish comes up and nails that fly, and you're actively fishing it back, and I've had them come up and take it and sort of half moon shape, take it on the way out, go plowing up river through the air, and actually everything tightens up when the fish is in the air. It's amazing, you know what I mean? It's incredible actually fishing, and these are like fresh spring fish, 9, 10, 11, 12 pound spring fish, and you've been handling that fly back. Now, here's what I talk about cast and all that. I'm really actively fishing that fly, but if I hand my fly rod to a guest, even after showing them what to do, and I have done this, they can't do it, and they can't do it because they can't both hand line and lift the rod at the same time, and hit the ground running and all the rest of it. And if you do anything wrong there, the fish can't see the fly until it's furrowing towards him, and it's make your mind up time. If he's going to have it, he's got to nail it there and then. And it's the suddenness, the quick appearance out of nothing, and he's got to take it or not take it or let it go. And if there's a fresh one there, a sea lice red, he'll usually nail it. And it's the most exciting fishing you could ever have. But that's active fishing. Do you know what I mean? So it's not. It's exciting. Like mini tube fishing, the moist same as that. But if you're fishing down and across and the line tightens up and you hook the fish and all, that's great too. Don't get me wrong, but it's not the same as the active fishing. It's not the same experience.
And that's exactly from what I've read, what I've heard is that the most successful salmon anglers are the ones who are actively fishing every cast. That the kind of cast out, take a step down. That's nearly hitting hope for those that are just passive all the time, because you're throwing the line out there and you're kind of seeing what happens. Whereas what you're saying is you're actually thinking about what you're doing, why, and targeting it on the basis of that.
That's right. Now, here's the other thing about salmon fishing, and this is the big thing, right? People get despondent. Now, I could go down to that bridge pool on the Delphi and do that, or even pools on the Y and do that, and I mightn't get anything, right? And that's fine. And do it again, and it takes a bit of effort and all. You go up and not get anything, and then you might get one, or you might even get two in a day. The thing that I tell people then is not to get despondent. And so once you're fishing right for salmon with the fly, you're not doing anything different at all when one does take it than when one doesn't. The only thing that changed is a fresh sea lice taken fish was there and nailed it. And sometimes I try and drill that into people's heads when they, say you'd fish a beautiful fly, you couldn't get nuts. Don't worry, you can get anything. You fished it right. That's all. So the reason we didn't get anything is not one there, or even if there is one there, is not one that wants to take there and all that. It's as long as you do the same thing, fish the same efficiency, the same way, and just keep doing it. I said, there'll be a time when you're doing that the keen fresh fish will be there and will take, and it's not, you're not making a mistake, you're not doing anything wrong. It's just that there's an outside factor that you haven't got control of, thankfully, because you can't see into the water, which is a good thing. I mean, if you could see into the water, it would spoil the whole thing. There's this barrier there that doesn't let you really know what's going on for 100% certain. You've always got to guess, like there's a place at the bottom of on the Delphi fish, you're just talking about seeing, you can see fish on the Delphi because the water's so clear. There's a place on the bottom where people, sometimes before they fish the pool, the meadow pool, they'll go down, go out over the bridge, crawl up the other side, peer into the water, and it's the first pool where fish come out of the sea, and see if there's any fish in it or not. And but there's people that will never look, they don't want to know. So I just fish it because if there's fish there or not fish there, I don't want to go around there and look at and see that there's no fish. It would spoil my fishing. I'd rather just fish expectantly, and if you get one, I get one. If I don't, I don't. And I could understand that, and that's the kind of the interesting thing about salmon fishing. If you could see clearly through the water and see everything, it would totally spoil it. You wouldn't, you would say, oh, there's no fish there, no fish there. The excitement is when you don't know 100% what's going on. The most you can do is control what you're doing yourself, and that's the objective to me of the hunter fisherman, is to get total control of what you're doing, know what you're doing, why you're doing it, and then even then it's up to nature then. But the thing is, consistently over the long term, you will catch more fish when you're approaching it correctly, because you're doing things after a fashion. But it's the person that hasn't got it. Say I've caught fish, fish in sunray shadows or mini tubes or pulsating shrimp flies and all. I'm very happy then. I know that works, and I know that's a great way to fish, and know if the fish are taken, you get one if you meet the fresh one. But if the person hasn't got that experience, they can get despondent. They can think, well, there's nothing like having the confidence in the technique through experience in it fishing well, to know that you're fishing okay and not get despondent, especially say in the springtime when there's not that many fish about and stuff. But to keep fishing, I'm very happy fishing away, even though I don't get nothing. Even for days, I'm still happy. It doesn't bother me.
I think that's the hardest thing for people starting out, and even when they've got a bit of experience under the belt, it's not knowing maybe whether what you're doing is correct. You know what I mean? If you're not catching, because then you kind of start questioning yourself. Oh, is the fly wrong? Is the technique wrong? Is what I'm doing, the way I'm approaching it wrong? And it takes
Yeah,
the
yeah.
learned hand to say, no, you're doing right. Keep at it. Like, it's just they're not taking it, and that's for me. I know I found it, and I still find it's kind of the most frustrating thing, because you're then questioning yourself, going, Jesus, this is, what am I doing wrong here? Like,
That's right. Yeah, that's where experience a bit of experience of good fishing every now and then gives you the confidence to know that the fish will take your fly whenever they're in the mood. And that's why to concentrate your efforts on fresh fish fishing. Fresh fish fishing is the really, I would say, is probably the only salmon fishing people should do, especially at the beginning, because first of all they're forgiven. You don't have to have it 100% right. The freshness or keenness of the fish sometimes will override other factors, and you'll still get odd ones anyway. But even for an experienced angler, you're going to get a much better chance of getting fresh fish. So that's what I'm saying about the times to fish the rivers are when the main runs are on, or the it's the natural time for the runs to happen. And that's the beauty about being on a river at that time of year too, is if you fish down your beat and you don't get anything, it doesn't matter a big pile on a river like say the Moy or other, within the next run down, you could get a couple, or you could go down 4 or 5 times, get down. But then, fish can move in, fish can be moving through. It can be some come up off the tide, whatever, because it's the time of year that they are arriving and running through. And also the nature of those fish. I mean, first of all, to look at them, they're in prime condition. But secondly, the nature of them it's the best time to get them by the mentality of the fish. We were talking earlier about the mentality of the angler, but for instance, the first grills that come in are usually stone mad. They're absolutely attack things savagely. Like, say, for instance, I fish the earth, or you can tell fish a collie dog a good bit, and sometimes strip a collie dog. And when those really first grills come in, the early ones, they'll love that. They'll go crazy for it. But after a while, even fresh fish coming in later, it's like someone flicked a switch. They won't look at it anymore. They'll take smaller ones or smaller flies, but they won't chase and savagely take those collie dogs anymore. There's a time period where the mentality of the fish is allowed for that type of fishing, and it's again that's very exciting fishing and all that. But then as the season progresses, it just comes like as if you flick the switch, and you can see it happening, and that's just the nature of the mindset of the fish, let's put it that way, changes, and that's another thing you notice. So I can turn around. That's what we're talking about flies. I can say the collie dog is a great fly, a 7 centimeter collie dog, fabulous fly. But if you're using it at the end of July compared to using it, in the middle of June, it's two different experiences. Do you know what I mean?
how can you winkle out those kind of fish that aren't as fresh? Not necessarily stale, but they're, like you said, they've gone beyond that mad mentality. Like,
Oh no, well most of the time you're fishing, yeah, they're that the earliest grills are like that. The Springer is a very good taker, but he isn't well. Most of them aren't as mad as the first early grills, which are really genuinely half crazy, But no, most fish will take. I'm only talking about how suicidal the early ones are, how keen they are, But most of the fresh fish will take normal fishing tactics anyway, like passive or active fishing with normal, excuse me, herrings or shrimp flies or small tubes and stuff. But the early ones are particularly keen. And it's exciting when if you're stripping your collie dog back through beat 9 off the top of the weir and fish are slashing and overrunning it, and taking it. It's exciting, Same in the springtime, the springers will do that, In fact, one of the most memorable experiences I have there in beat 9 in the earth was an English guy playing a very big spring salmon there. And I seen it taking the fly, just taking the collie dog. He didn't even see it. And I seen by the head and shoulders as it cruised through sliced through, sideways through the tube. I knew it was a very big fish. I was amazed that he didn't see it. I couldn't understand that, But you find that through guiding and time. I mean, I remember on the Moy seeing a good few fish one morning. I said to the guy, "There's a good few fish traveling anyway. And he said, why, did you see one? Or did you see any? And I'm thinking he's not serious. I'd seen like 30 fish maybe. And I was thinking, is he serious? But he was serious. He hadn't seen anything. And anyway, on the fly, to a certain extent, then, as we can say, the fly is related to the freshness of the fish too. The fly that I would choose at the time of the season, it's related to the time of season and the freshness of the fish. So, like I remember, sometimes you go on salmon forums, and I remember there was a little bit, not a big argument, just different opinions. There was one guy from the Slaney said that the best fly to catch fish in September was a bibio or something, and another, or black pen or bibio, and the other guy was fishing on the moor, and he was fishing bright shrimp flies. And see what the both were right. The guy on the Mourne was right for the Mourne because it's a peaty spate river, and the guy was right on the Slaney for that time of year for September. They were both right, but they didn't. How would I say? Not maybe they did. Or they didn't seem to realize that each other was right for their circumstances. Yeah, so you could, and they were sort of disagreeing over it, but they were both actually correct. And what works in one place doesn't necessarily work in another, So
And I suppose that's the other thing for salmon anglers to be learning is it's again, it comes down to the conditions, and it's specific to the environment and the surroundings. And that's why I do kind of reference trout fishermen in that sense, because they're very conscious of the conditions, and maybe that's something that salmon anglers need to kind of take on board more.
There's a myth around salmon angling that, you have to be lucky, and, if your name's on them and you meet them and all that, and if you subscribe to that myth, you're already beat. You need to be throwing that out. You need to be thinking, these are fish the same as any other fish. They have preferences the same as any other. They may not be feeding, but then the nature and they're influenced by the environment, by even the geography of the riverbed and stuff like that. So once you've got to start putting those pieces. You've got to start observing what happens and why. And as I say, why, I mean, what happens to a certain extent, why, not the philosophical why. Well, if you subscribe to the myth, you're already beat. Let's put it that way. You're already beat. If you want to be a hunter of salmon, let's put it that way.
Yeah, exactly. You don't leave it to chance.
Yeah.
Is there any other kind of last bits of advice you'd give people in terms of trying to improve their catch rates then?
Yeah, you've got to see what is going on. To take a note of everything, and ask the older guys. I mean, some of these guys will tell you if you ask them. That's how you learn from other people that are doing things. But and I've mentioned before, just to improve your cast. I'll tell you a good one on the casting. Then, for instance, sometimes the Ridge Pool is a very popular place in Ballina, and sometimes you go down there and have a look over the wall and see what's happening, or you'd be in the tackle shop or whatever. So I was watching two guys over there one time, and one of them was overhead casting and one was spey casting. Now, the guy that was spey casting wasn't that proficient at it, and he couldn't turn the fly over. The other guy that was overhead casting, he was turning his fly over. Now, the reason that becomes relevant is there's an upstream, sometimes in a warm day, you get an upstream sea breeze coming in from Killala Bay, and it's a north wind which blows directly up the ridge pool. So if you can't turn your fly over now into the wind, then you're not going to turn your fly over. So anyway, the thing is, sometimes there are people way down the near side, and the fish get beat across to the other side of the wall, and they're lying thick along the wall. Now, I was watching them, and I knew they're sort of friend of a friend, and I'd been down early. I think it was on with someone myself later, and I was watching them and seeing what was going on. So anyway, one of them, a friend of a friend, talking to him, he said, "It's funny, it shows you it's just all luck." He said, "I only got one fish, and my friend there, he got 9, or 8 or 9, whatever." And I said, "Well, I know that." I said, "But it wasn't luck." And he said, "Oh no, we were both fishing the same flies and fishing the same pool at the same time." I said, "Yeah, but he was turning the fly over into the wind and you weren't." I said, "And all the fish are beat across to the far side." I said, "By the time you're a leader and fly straightened out, it dead drifted at the start. You were out of the taking zone, or basically the zone that most people don't reach at the right angle or whatever, and you were fishing over the heavily fished fished, whereas your friend was getting the fish that didn't really see a fly at the right angle and speed that often." I said, "And that's why he caught the fish and you didn't, simply because he was turning the fly over and simply because he was overhead casting, able to do that." I said, "Now you can do it spey casting as well." I said, "But you weren't doing it. You need a little bit more proficiency." And I said, "But if you'd have turned your fly over, you'd have got just as many fish as he got." And another example was, I know a good friend of mine, because we were talking about different types of flies and matters about shrimp flies and stuff. So he would change flies because there's a clock there every hour. And he put a fly on the dropper and a fly on the tail, and every hour then he'd switch the two flies around. And one day he had 10 fish, and it was 9 on the fly, no matter where he put it on one fly, which was the Curry's red shrimp, and only 1 on the other fly. So like that shows you, if you've got the practical experiment in a time like that, and with the same guy now, he was fishing in the afternoon, and I was there one time, and not fishing, but I was there watching, and there was 2 famous anglers. There were one American, one English one, and they were leaving and they didn't get anything. And the guy turned around to me because I know him from the magazine. So he said, "Well, the fish aren't taken today." And I said, "No, that's not the case." I said, "Have you got 20 minutes?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "Just sit here for 20 minutes." I said, "You see that guy?" Was Paddy Bonner from the tackle club. I said, "See that guy going out there?" I said, "He'll soon see whether the fish are taken or not." I said, "I guarantee he doesn't get down to the bridge without hooking maybe half a dozen." And he said, "No." I said, "Just watch, do you see?" And that's exactly what happened. And that's what I'm talking about, predictability. If you can predict something's going to happen. And I said, now, I'm not mentioning who they were. I said, you can't make definitive statements if you haven't got the right gear, can't cast right, can't handle the wind, can't do the distance, can't do the angle. I said, then you cannot say that the fish aren't taken. I said, you've got shortcomings yourself, which you didn't overcome. I said, and that guy hasn't got any shortcomings. And I said, that's the result.
And what was the difference with Paddy's fishing?
Oh, he's fishing the fly. The water was a little bit higher than normal, so he was cutting through the excess water because he had the right sink tip on, and then he had the wind was upstream, so he had a 15-foot Loomis rod with a lee wolf triangle taper line on. He was turning the flies over at distance at the right angle. Because the water was that little bit higher, you had to have the double hand rod, you had to have the length, you had to have the angle. A very funny thing actually happened to him one time. This is really funny. It's one of the funniest incidents ever. He was fishing like that, and some people that don't know how to fish. Anyway, there's these 2 guys fishing on the bank, and they were sharing a pair of waders, neoprene waders, a boot foot waders. So one guy would go down the pool, then the other guy would go down and they'd change the waders every time. So it was at the end of May or early June. There was a few late springers, big springers, and there was a lot of early grills. This is years and years ago, and the early grills are like 2.5 pound, and the late springers are very big. So the guys are fishing single-handed rod. They're not experienced. It's not their fault. And they're fishing square across the river, and they're wading out as far as they can. Paddy's in fishing the double-handed rod, and he's fishing a class 2 sinking line, so it's going under the water. The guys are actually casting over Paddy's line, but he doesn't say anything. It doesn't matter. He knows they're beginners, and it doesn't really matter because his fly's fishing under them anyway, and he just hand lines it and cast again, and everything's all right. But anyway, Paddy hooks one of these big late spring fish. It was later weighed at 16 pounds. So it tears off down river and does an impression of the blue marlin and the old man of the sea, right? Jumping like. But at the same time as Paddy got the take, this guy hooks a fish outside of him, and it was a small grill, so it was like 2 pound or whatever. But he hooks a fish anyway on the single-handed rod, and the first thing he sees then is this big fish clearing the water below him, heading down river, and he sees the line hanging from it, right? So he thinks that he's caught on something outside in the river, and he's hooked this huge salmon, which was later weighed at 16 pound, which is a really seriously big spring fish for the Moy. So he puts 2 and 2 together. He thinks that's the fish he's hooked, and he's caught and snag outside. So he turns around to his friend on the bank and screams, "Help, help, I'm in a monster and I'm stuck around a rock." So the guy, with his normal clothes on, because they're sharing a pair of waders, right, picks up a net and runs into the river in his trousers, right out up to his chest, right? And Paddy's wading down to the guy saying, "Look, I think you've made a mistake." He said, "You find the fish you think you've hooked is my fish and not your fish." But this guy isn't listening, right? Because he's completely lost it, and he's screaming, "I'm a monster! Did you see it? Did you see it?" and all this, right? And then eventually, when the guy's out beside him with the net up, pops this little like 2.5 pound grills, right? So
the hardest fighting
so there
fish.
you have it. Yeah. So anyway, when you on a big venue like the Ridge Pool, you need to be doing things right, and that's when it matters too. And on the I mentioned there the wind several times, and that's what I thought about casting. For instance, like 2 examples are it doesn't matter the length of the rudder. If you can't handle the wind, can't turn the fly over into the wind, you're going to be beat. Small or big river, if you can't cast left hand, you're going to be beat if you're in the right bank and all this. That's why it matters so much. And, I could even tell you one other incident, not an incident, but another about casting. I've been on the Delphi lots of times where people have had to roll cast. And because you're fishing from the bank there and you kind of stand back a little bit, every time the person roll casts, they pull the fly straight into the bank and into the bushes. And the reason, because they're not making acceleration, stuff like that. But anyway, so get your casting sorted, really sorted, and then you'll catch more fish.
Exactly, and like you said, try and aim it for the fresh run of fishing to make it easier on yourself. It's hard enough as it is. Don't try and make it any more difficult. If people want to find out more, like, because you said, Robert, you're still going to be doing casting instructions. So if people do want to find out more, how can they get in contact?
Well, you can check my website or just ring from that. Probably do a few videos and stuff over the winter and put something up on YouTube. I haven't done anything for years, but basically on the website, Fly Casting Matters, I'll get my details on that.
And I have to say to people, there's a huge amount of information there as it is in terms of articles. I get the sense, Robert, I've only scratched the surface in terms of what could be gleaned from the depths of what you know about salmon fishing. So, it's
lifelong learning for everyone.
Exactly.
Everyone's on a learning curve, It's just, but I can't say it. I learned it from other people. You meet guys and you pick up a bit here, a bit there. People show you this, that, and unfortunately for me, I must say I was very fortunate. When I was young, my father already salmon fished a lot, and he had a lot of it sorted out, so that helped. I suppose I was fortunate that way.
Best luck for the remainder of the lockdown and for 2021 as well, and for the new career, and hope it all goes well. And we'll talk again, because like I said, I think we've only scratched the surface of what we can learn from it.
Thanks very much for that, Dara. That's very good of you to say. I appreciate that. Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
My thanks to Robert Gillespie for joining me on the show, and do visit his website robertgillespie.net for more details and information. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe to the Ireland on the Fly podcast on Apple, Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts from. You can also keep up to date on IrelandOnTheFly.com as well as on Instagram, and I'll be back with another episode about the people and places of fly fishing in Ireland.